hardest to map is pretty much everything that leaves your facility and actually is supposed to arrive at the clinical site. Those are the hardest to map. It's the transportation to the airport, it's getting everything onto the plane, it's getting the plane to the actual airport correctly, it is getting it offloaded, and then ultimately finally getting it to the clinical site. And especially as we're going to all these wonderful new countries throughout the world that have their own challenges, whether it's customs issues, whether it's regulatory issues, whether it's even temperature or power issues. There's all kinds of challenges with the infrastructure and every step along the way. So what would you do to go ahead and overcome those? We're in a partnership. The partnership, which is absolutely key, is the fact that we have to work together. And the lesson learned that I've learned a long time ago is try to find the people that really know as much about all these issues as possible. And typically what I do is I go to the actual couriers, or I go to the customs brokers, and I talk to them and I say, okay, I'm going to be shipping into the Congo. Can you tell me what are the issues with the Congo? Okay, so what are the challenges that I have with regards to transportation? What are the areas that I have with regards to what happens when they actually get to customs? What do they do? I heard a great comment from a good friend who actually presented here at this conference, Sue Lee from World Courier. Her comment was awesome. She was talking about the Congo. And one of the Congo's newest things to do is they'll take out the temperature monitor to check and see if it's actually been tripped and gone out of spec. And if it has, they won't allow the shipment in. On the other hand, if it is not tripped, they will then pack everything, they'll hold on to the temperature monitor, and then ship it to the site. When the site gets it, there's no temperature monitor, so then they have no idea if anything went wrong. These are examples of the amazing things that happen along the distribution and the supply chain. These are the things that we have to watch out for before we even get there. So I'd say, what are the golden rules? Some of the golden rules are do some risk assessment. Everything these days is risk-based monitoring, risk-based quality, and what it is it's really a concept that says, what are we doing to mitigate the risks so we keep as much of the clinical supply chain under control? So if we do that, if we do some good risk assessment, if we collaborate with our partners, whether they be in quality or regulatory, our vendors who will be the couriers and the customs brokers, things will go really much more smoothly. And that's really what it's all about. So the potential savings that you might have if you actually do some really good distribution planning are amazing. These days we're doing a lot of trials with comparators, and those comparators range from the sublime to the ridiculous in terms of how much they actually cost. So if we actually take a look at what those costs would be, especially with regards to oncology, these days there are some oncology products that are literally $5,000 a vial. And when you're actually doing a large phase 3 trial and you're going into sites all over the world, if you have just one shipment that goes out of spec, the cost can be staggering. So therefore, when we talk about costs, we already know we have issues with regards to overages. In many cases, we're being left with millions of dollars of drug, which we then sometimes turn to our vendor partner or our comparator partners and we go, can you resell this for us? But in these situations where they arrive out of spec and they're no good, that can actually really wind up costing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars. And it's up to us to go ahead and make sure that those losses never occur. The typical slip-ups are the fact that we don't do enough planning and forecasting. We don't do enough collaborating with clinical operations to go ahead and find out what their issues are. They don't actually spend enough time with us to understand what our challenges are. So what winds up happening is you wind up in sometimes a contentious or adversarial relationship with your clinical operations group. And what should actually be occurring is that you should actually be partners. So in order to overcome that relationship sometimes, as dysfunctional as it may be, we have a tendency to actually do a lot more overage because we don't talk as much as we should. We don't know what the needs or the demands are. We haven't forecasted well enough. So what winds up happening is we have to cover ourselves because we don't ever want to have a stock out. We don't ever want to have a patient show up at a clinical site and not have drug there to start. And for that reason, we will go ahead and we will actually do overages that are, in many cases, pretty impressive. I've seen companies roll from 25% almost up to 100% in overage. If you can get down to 25%, that's not bad, but I've actually seen some companies with the right planning and forecasting tools in place and collaborative environments with clinical operations drop it down to about 10%. And that's the savings on that is amazing, as well as the time savings because you don't have to source as much and you have the ability to actually work with your supplies and your expiry dates with those. So those are some good things. Communication, collaboration, planning, forecasting, get the right tools, train your people, work with clinical operations, that's easy. I think the future in terms of the clinical supply industry and what excites me the most is the people that are coming into it. I mean, there's a lot of really, really great folks coming into it. They bring a lot of wonderful perceptions and perspectives that we haven't seen in the past. And sometimes what happens with dinosaurs like me, we've been in the industry for so long that we actually wind up in our own paradigm. So we have the same concept over and over again. The beauty of what technology is doing for us these days is really changing us and changing our perception. And these folks that are coming into the industry are wonderful. And they actually challenge us. And they ask that really essential question, which is, why are we doing this? And I'm not going to accept because this is the way we've always done it. So those are the things that actually allow us to not only innovate, but also come up with some really new innovative concepts that will make our lives so much easier. There's some really, really good stuff in the pipeline. There's probably a couple kids in a garage someplace that are coming up with something amazing. I think that the two that are the most interesting to watch right now is definitely the stuff on labels. Electronic labels is one of those wonderful things that is going to allow us to connect our smartphones to the cloud, which will allow us to go ahead and start making the labels much easier to read for patients, to actually go ahead and get all the information they need directly off their phones, to go ahead and actually eliminate the expiry dates, which would be wonderful. And that is a huge issue that we have coming up with the clinical trial regulation. So we've got that. And even the ability to just take as many words off the label as humanly possible and use pictograms allows us to go into all these different countries without having to come up with all these labels on all of our clinical supply kits. So that's going to be amazing, and they're like on cutting edge, and it's going to be interesting to see where they're at and how fast they evolve and get regulatory approval. So that's one. The other one, interestingly enough, is in the world of all of our new concepts for shipping and distribution for temperature control. There's all kinds of amazing stuff going on out there, and they range from stuff that goes ahead and protects our goods in a passive way for up to a week to get into different countries throughout the world, and ultimately gets smaller so that when it gets to the clinical sites it takes up less room. Another one that I find absolutely fascinating is something from Intellectual Ventures, which is a company out in Washington State in the US. And it's actually the CEO of that was like the chief innovation officer from Microsoft. And what's amazing is this device, they used the same concepts that they used for the space shuttle in terms of protecting the astronauts from the freezing cold of space. And they've used that to actually help out, where vaccines can now be stored in sub-Saharan Africa for up to a month with ice. And that's amazing, because if we can do that, then places where we have no infrastructure can go ahead and still be able to vaccinate their kids, go ahead and protect them from some of these horrible diseases that shorten their lifespans. So that's just some of the amazing technology that's out there, and there's so much more, but we just don't even have time to talk about it.